That's life. You got to take them as they come. I was born in 1927 in Marseille, France, southern France. My parents were Matthew and Alice. I was an only child all my life. Everything was concentrated on me. It was very stressful in the sense that I had no peer measurements. I had an uncle living about 3 miles away in Marseille with 4 grandchildren, and they were my only contact, apart from in school, with children of other people. My parents decided to travel to Spain in 1935 or 36, just before, as it turned out, the Spanish Civil War started. So we moved to Spain. I was sick practically the whole time because I guess subconsciously I didn't want to go to Spain. The Spanish Civil War started when a Spanish police station in Barcelona, which was 200 yards in back of us, was attacked by what was then Franco forces. It happened overnight. The next morning, my father decided we were leaving Spain and going back to France. In Israel, where my grandparents were living, that was the only time I ever met my grandparents. We visited up and down what was then Palestine. The roads were not surfaced properly, so we took a taxi for a couple of weeks and we visited as far north as Accra and as far south what was then Gaza. And we saw a lot of kibbutzim, and we passed a lot of British convoys supposedly protecting us from the Arab anti-Semitism. Every time an Arab would see us approaching, they would get off the camel, pick up a stone, throw it at the car as we went by, and then get back on the camel. So the whole place was full of mosquitoes and insects. It was completely uninteresting as far as I was concerned. But we did see Haifa, we did see Accra, and I have visions of Israel in those days was a network of patchy roads, and the British convoys were passing us occasionally. They were supposed to be protecting us, but I don't think they cared what we were doing. Every time we passed through a town, we had to be very careful not to kill any chicken or any animals crossing the street. After 1936, 37, 38, when the war clouds gathered over Europe, my father was trying to get my mother to leave France to come to the United States because he wanted to move. He wanted for business reasons. He had a lot of contacts in the United States. He was very friendly with the owner of Pompeian olive oil, who is still a very big importer of olive oil from Greece and other countries. They had moved to Washington and left their house in France because he saw the war coming and he didn't want to be stuck in Europe. My uncle in Paris, who had been quite successful, sold everything he had on the day that war was declared between France, England, and Germany. He moved immediately to Portugal because he also didn't want to get stuck in France. So when in 1939, when the French army debacle started, my father was pressuring my mother to leave Marseille, but she didn't want to go because all the family was living in Marseille. June or July 1940, after the first war, the first quiet time started between France and Germany with the Maginot Line in between. Everybody felt secure in France. When the Germans attacked suddenly in June 40, They captured Paris within a few days. My father decided we had to leave immediately. So he came one afternoon and he told my mother, who had prepared the family dinner on Shabbat, and he told her we're leaving now and we're going to Spain and Portugal to rejoin my uncle. And my mother didn't want to leave, but she had no choice. So we packed up, and about 3 hours later we found ourselves at the train station in Marseille, heading for military transport that was going to the border with Spain, transporting soldiers. We were strafed by German planes, but we were lucky because they had so many targets to destroy. By the time they got to our train, they almost had no ammunition left, so they couldn't kill anybody. But I remember vividly the German Stukas and the Messerschmitt coming over and making runs on our train. Anyway, we got to Madrid not knowing if we could get there because there was no border information between Spain and France. Anyway, we were lucky. A train turned up the next morning and we got on it and we got straight on to Madrid. And then from Madrid we took a train to Portugal. We met at the train station by my uncle and went to his house. We stayed in Portugal about 4 months, and then the Germans pressuring the Portuguese to intern all the refugees that were there. And they gave us a 7 days notice to get out of Portugal or be interned in concentration camps. My father and my uncle went on a tour of the embassies, and all they could do was purchase from an official in the Panamanian consulate an ostensibly permit to land in Panama. So with that they managed to get a berth on a Japanese ship, which was the only 2 ships available then were the Neaelas from Greece, which Greece was still non-involved in the war. A Japanese ship, the Hakozaki Maru, who was going on to Panama via New York and Baltimore, and loading a lot of American scrap for Japan. We passed in front of all the American Navy. The Japanese were on the bridge filming everything. We got to Panama, we crossed the Panama Canal. They confiscated temporarily all our cameras so we couldn't take pictures, and we had a squad of American soldiers stationed on the ship for the crossing. They got them drunk, and the Japanese were on the bridge filming everything while we couldn't take a picture of anything. While in Marseille, between 36 and 39, I became very involved in refugee problems because first my father was dealing with Spanish refugees who came to France. He was very honest and he had a very good relationship with them. He got one of the painters was Ricardo Navarro. He painted me at 13 years old. He was the leading Spanish painter in those days. He also had painted Mussolini and Hitler, so he was quite a guy. The painter Ricardo Navarro wanted to paint my mother, but my mother did not want to be painted, so she suggested me, and I was painted. It took about 7 or 8 sittings, and the only thing I didn't quite like about it is the nose. I don't think my nose was that straight. Anyway, I developed a fear of being a refugee because I met all these Spanish refugees that were suffering, and eventually that turned into a tide of German Jewish refugees that came to France as the German army was advancing and destroying Poland and all the eastern countries. I didn't want to be a refugee. And anyway, when we got to Lisbon, I had developed this fear of being a refugee all my life, having traveled so much, seen so much, and not wanting to be kicked out so much. We were stopped by a German U-boat outside of Lisbon, and they took out 3 British subjects on the ship. Then the British sent a cruiser from Bermuda, and they stopped us and brought us into Bermuda for 48 hours, past the minefields. Japanese officials on the ship. This is now September 40, a full year before the war started in December 41. They filmed the whole Panama Canal. We had a visa that was only a permit to land, but it was not acceptable to the Panamanian authorities. So until the last minute we didn't know if we could land or not. And I heard family Ergas, and I couldn't make out what it was in English because I didn't speak English. I went to my parents, the Japanese ship, to land in Panama. When we were in Panama, the American Congress passed the first law permitting children under guardianship to come and live in the United States. And we're now talking of January 1941. When I went to French consul in Panama, they escorted my father and I out at gunpoint because we were traitors, having left France in June 40. Fortunately, the Panama Canal was important to the US, so they staged a coup and they pushed out all the French Vichy staff from the French embassy in Panama. I was able to go back about 4 or 5 weeks later and get a French passport issued by the French so I could travel to the United States. So I got on the ship, the SS Panama, and I traveled alone because my parents could not get a visa to come with me to New York via the Caribbean. Couple of ports of call. I think one of them was Haiti. I never got off the ship because I didn't trust myself and I was traveling alone. I was met by the Guardian at New York docks. He lived in Flushing, New York, and I went there for about 6 months, lived with 3 other German refugee children who did not know if their parents were alive or not because they were already in concentration camps in Germany. Nobody will tell me that nobody knew that the Germans were running concentration camps in 1941, February 41. I went to high school. They put me in first term high school, and because my studies in the French curriculum were far more advanced than they were in the United States, they shifted me to the 7th term and the 8th term. I graduated in June 42 and applied to the NYU for bachelor's in mechanical engineering degree. I was supposed to graduate in class of 46, but in 1945, when I became 18, I got a notice from the draft board that if I intended to remain in the United States, I should volunteer for the US Army. I was very glad to volunteer because I hated the Germans. I just wanted to get back. I took my basic training, finished it at the end of August 45 when the atomic bomb was exploded, and our whole basic training was landing in Japan. We were supposed to be the first shock troops to land in Japan. So I was very lucky because the atomic bomb, the Japs gave up. What ended up was because I spoke French and some German I picked up from the German refugees and some Spanish I picked up in Spain. They switched me the night before the outfit was going to Japan. They switched me from Japan to Europe. And I ended up over Thanksgiving 45. I went to Europe and they put me in charge of the troop train taking us to Germany from Le Havre in France. We crossed over on the Independence. In Germany, they didn't know what to do with me. I had almost 3 years of college, and they tried to put me in a tank corps. I knew how an engine worked, but I didn't know how to fix it. So that was very short-lived. So they put me in charge of fire direction control operator in a 105 howitzer outfit with the 3rd Division. And they kept sending me for interviews at headquarters in Berchtesgaden and all over Germany in Kassel. They didn't know what to do with me. I had 2.5 years of college. Anyway, we had an interesting confrontation We went on maneuvers in 46. I was fire direction control operator. I didn't even know how to give the orders. So we're lined up, the 3 howitzers are lined up, and the general of the outfit is watching. And I go to the map, and I get left 20, up 15, fire. They fired. The shot went, nobody could see where it went. I forgot to take the elevation into consideration. So the shot was all over the place. Eventually they found it about 6-7 miles out, exploding. The general went crazy. He says, "What fire direction control operator have you got?" So I said, "I got no training. I don't even know how to give orders." That's how bad the army was in those days. Everybody was going home. In December 45, they stopped permitting all the GIs to send all the money home without limits. You're only permitted to send home only your salary, which was minimal. But up to those days, all the GIs made a fortune. Some of them were selling eggs, $50 each on the black market. Cigarettes were $50 a carton. We were in the American zone. The English zone, I don't know what was going on, but I was all over the French zone. I went to Kassel, I went to Munich, I went to Berchtesgaden. They didn't know where to put me. So in June 1946, or August 46, we went on one of these exploratory visits where they wanted to transfer me. We were right on the American and Russian zone. They told us to dig foxholes overnight. Patton, who was our general in charge, was going to attack the Russians, or the Russians were going to attack us. We could hear the Russian tanks on the other side moving back and forth. And the tension on the border was tremendous. Anyway, we dug foxholes, never used them, thank God. And the next morning, all clear sounded. After that, in October, November 46, we were training for hand-to-hand combat. I was used as a guinea pig, and the sergeant in charge flipped me over his shoulder. He dislocated my entire left arm, was sticking out in the back. I ended up with a Purple Heart. I was in hospital for 5 months. They couldn't fix it. So I got discharged in January 47 after staying in the hospital in Munich for months, then get transported on a hospital ship. I came back on a hospital ship. So I've had a dislocated left arm. I can't straighten it and I can't bend it. I graduated in June 48 from NYU, and I went to work for the federal government in the patent office because I figured the only way I could combine engineering and law, which I wanted to study, was by being in patents. I decided to set up my own patent practice. While I was in the patent office, I met all the dignitaries because speaking French, Spanish, and some German, every time they came in, I was escorting them. So I got interested in international patents. And there still is no international agreement on patents to this day. So you have to obtain a patent in every country. So I was dealing in US patents. My wife being British, I decided the best way to do it was to go meet the clients where they were, in Europe. So I set up my office in London, which I was able to do. I wrote a seminal article for the British Board of Trade Journal in 47. I negotiated with them that I would be permitted to practice as a US patent expert in England, which was something because nobody could get a permit to practice law in England unless they were British. Anyway, I negotiated and I got it. And I became an associate of the Chartered Institute of Patent Agents in London for about 5 years. And I had several patents. I had original patent work, which I had done on US patents because in those days, the Alien Property Custodian Act was in charge. So people in Germany couldn't apply directly in Washington. They had to go to the alien property custodian. And I negotiated a lot of these patent applications, which became patents eventually. One of my favorite clients was Gerhard Dirks, who sold his patents to IBM, which is the original IBM patent for all the computers. The binary system was established by Gerhard Dirks, who was a German engineer who spent the whole war supposedly having died, but his wife and him had a house built which had a separate compartment. He was living under the kitchen the whole war because he didn't want to be part of the German war machine. But he did do very well. He sold his patents to IBM, and I negotiated for the English original patent agent American rights to the American patents. I also had an interesting session with ICI International because titanium was and still is a very important metal. And titanium is being produced by melting down the rare earth metal into billets, and then they cut the billets to shape for each part that had to be done. And in those days, you're talking now 1948, 49, 50, titanium was very important metal. I had a client who was a British inventor. He was obtaining a patent in the United States by using a centrifuge to produce titanium in very small powder form, and then you could take the powder and make it into molds to whatever shape you wanted. Would you believe it that the British government invested over £1 million in those days on the process of shaping the titanium? ICI decided they wouldn't let it live. They just froze everything. The process for using and cutting titanium was called the Kroll process. They wouldn't let him use it. It was much cheaper, much better, but they had billions of money invested in plants for cutting and processing titanium. They couldn't let it live, so they blocked us at every outlet, and we couldn't do anything with it. It was very frustrating for me, because I knew the merits and they couldn't go industrially. We could get nobody to invest. As soon as we started getting people interested, they would come in and offer them money to keep them quiet. Would you believe it? This is the unwritten law, and this is still going on today. Even in whatever you want to do, the power of money in government is very, very hard to control, and it has always shaped me to the problems that our industry and our free enterprise is faced with, even today. I practiced patents for about 15 years. I had a lot of interesting patents. I had the first patent application by Dunlop for the tire in a metal sheath. We couldn't get a patent. You know why? Because some American inventor in 1895 or 97 had obtained a patent for sheathing metal strips in a tire to make it much stronger. They couldn't do it industrially because they didn't have the know-how. But he got the idea, and that blocked us from getting a patent. Dunlop to this day has never been able to control the patent, neither Michelin nor the other competitors in the tire industry. That's why you see so many different tires being made, all by the same process. I joined Shamoon Industries, which was a New York Stock Exchange listed company, as director of purchasing. I controlled all the purchasing for the company for about 3-4 years. That's another reason why I didn't want to work for anybody else. While I was there, the chairman, Mr. Shamoon, his daughter was getting married to another fellow. The other fellow didn't like my competition. He thought I was too strong. So he kept undercutting me. In the end, I severed my arrangements with the company. That's another reason why I didn't want to work for anybody else, because I didn't want to deal with nepotism. which is also rampant in many companies. I set up I doubled their production in 1 year by doubling up their melting facility. They produced water pipe. Almost all the water pipe in New York City was supplied in those days by Shamoon Industries. I devised a patent for doubling their production with one machine, from the cupolas to the foundry, and at the foundry shaping the pipe. It was made of ductile iron. This is going back to 1964. Oh, the only other thing I didn't mention was the death of our only child in 1963. He went in with an infection in the kidneys, and they didn't know what to do with antibiotics in those days. The doctor that treated him was at Mount Sinai, and they over-medicated him. They killed him, literally. They wanted me to sue. I never wanted to sue because I didn't want to bring back all the pain. And Michelle was born afterwards. Michelle is our only child. My wife never wanted more than one child. But when he died like that, so she's been suffering all her life, feeling that she wasn't wanted. She is. My wife passed away after 65 years of marriage, July 2018. My wife went through a very difficult patch in between, when the boy died and when she was born. I'm not sure if she's really ever adjusted to the loss of the boy. She died of cancer. That's life. You gotta take them as they come.